The Galactic Council chamber was silent. A silence not born from respect, but from primal fear. The kind encoded deep within the DNA of every sentient species that had survived being prey. This wasn't diplomacy. This wasn't negotiation. This was a display. And the humans had orchestrated it perfectly. Ambassador Ileana Reyes stood alone on the council floor, flanked by no guards, no aides, no armor. Just her cold gaze and a briefcase. Inside that briefcase was everything. Not weapons, not technology, but something far worse. Proof of what humanity really was. The Varthax delegation had violated the ceasefire accord, assuming the humans were still the naive newcomers they had welcomed with condescending smiles and covert surveillance. But humans knew, they always knew, and they waited, watching, smiling back. What the Varthax didn't realize, what none of them did, was that humanity's history wasn't a tale of technological marvel or diplomatic genius. It was a tale of calculated ruthlessness wrapped in charm. It was wolves learning to wear sheep's clothing so well, the flock began to trust them. Until the day the wolf smiled and reminded everyone, it still had teeth. Ambassador Reyes activated the holo recordings, surveillance footage, distress calls, conversations intercepted through firewalls the Varthax thought unbreachable. A silent scream built in the chamber as the evidence unfolded. And then came the retaliation logs. Human response teams, surgical, efficient, relentless. There were no raised voices, no threats, just the cold, methodical dismantling of an empire that dared strike first. Not to conquer, not to punish, but to send a message. Humans don't bluff. They let you build your grave before they push you in. The council chamber remained silent even as the holograms faded. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Every ambassador, admiral, and dignitary could feel the ancient instinct crawling up their spine. Predator. This wasn't the unveiling of a declaration. This was a confession carved into history with surgical precision. A subtle reminder that the galaxy had miscalculated. Because humans weren't playing a game of diplomacy. They were the game. If that first taste of humanity's terrifying truth sent chills down your spine, then you need to be here for what comes next. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for the full tale of how the galaxy learned its deadliest lesson the hard way. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think humanity is the ultimate apex predator, or just really good at pretending? Hit that bell icon too. You won't want to miss the day we talk about what happened to the Varthax homeworld. They called it First Contact Protocol, a carefully crafted sequence of outreach, diplomacy, and cooperation designed to ease a new species into the galactic community. For centuries, the Galactic Assembly followed this routine like scripture. When humanity emerged from their little blue planet, scarred by war, driven by ambition, and united only in their thirst to survive, the Assembly didn't panic. They saw another species to mold, to manage, to manipulate. What they didn't see was the storm beneath the surface. Humans learned fast, far faster than any species before them. Not just technology, they mastered culture, psychology, and galactic law. Within decades, they weren't just participating in treaties. They were rewriting them. And all the while they smiled. Always smiling. The mistake the galaxy made wasn't welcoming humanity. The mistake was assuming that the humans were like them. That underneath their contradictions and chaos, they shared the same base programming as the rest of sentient life. They didn't. Humanity's instincts had been forged in a crucible of relentless competition. Their evolution shaped by conflict, starvation, extinction events. Their empathy was genuine, but weaponized. Their kindness was real, but calculated. They didn't rise to the top of their world through peace. They rose through dominance, through strategy, through fear. And most chillingly of all, they had learned how to hide it. Diplomacy was their mask. And it worked until it didn't. When the Varthax launched a surprise strike on a human colony world, expecting negotiation or retreat, they were met with silence. For 72 hours, not a single human communique was received. Then the black ships came, not with fanfare, not with threats, just silence and fire. Entire fleets vanished, command networks severed, supply lines obliterated. By the time the Galactic Council intervened, it was over. Not a war, a correction, a cold recalibration of boundaries. When pressed, the humans said only this: we tried to be peaceful, but we never forgot who we were. And that was the day the galaxy finally understood. The Varthax betrayal began not with weapons, but with words. Carefully crafted lies wrapped in diplomatic niceties, traded across the stars under the pretense of trade and cooperation. For years, they had smiled at humans across negotiation tables, shared drinks during galas, and exchanged symbolic gifts. Behind the scenes, though, they were probing, testing, measuring human strength and resolve, convinced that beneath all the charm and cultural exchange, humanity was just another soft-bodied species eager to please and slow to retaliate. The Varthax believed themselves the apex tacticians of the galaxy, honed through centuries of cold, calculated expansion. They had done this before to others, less organized species who either bowed or burned. They expected the same outcome with Earth. They didn't realize that humanity had already studied them, mapped every political weakness, cataloged every false smile. The betrayal struck suddenly. Under the guise of a joint planetary development agreement, the Varthax launched a precision strike on the Terran colony of Kalos 3, destroying orbital relays, targeting terraforming stations, and jamming all outbound signals. Over 40,000 civilians perished in the first hour alone, most of them scientists, families, and colonists. The attack was surgical, efficient, and deliberately timed to coincide with Earth's celebration of Intergalactic Unity Day, a calculated insult layered atop the atrocity. The Varthak's expected outrage, of course, maybe a flurry of condemnations, a plea to the Galactic Council, or at worst, a retaliatory skirmish easily diffused by bureaucratic delay. What they got instead was silence. For 72 hours, not a single word came from Earth or any of its colonies. No statement, no condemnation, no fleet movements. The council chambers buzzed with confusion and unease, while Varthak's diplomats played smug and unbothered, whispering theories that perhaps the humans were paralyzed by fear, debating their next desperate move. In reality, Earth was neither frozen nor uncertain. They were watching, listening, and preparing. The silence wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. On the fourth day, black ships appeared along the periphery of Varthak's space. They bore no insignias, no visible identification, and broadcast no communication. They did not respond to hails. By the time their intent was clear, it was too late. The first to fall were deep space listening stations, erased without a trace. Then shipyards, followed by orbital defense platforms. Human operatives, long embedded in Varthak's infrastructure, triggered cascading sabotage across data networks, communications relays, and AI logistics hubs. A coordinated digital blackout plunged entire sectors into chaos. And when the first Varthak's fleet mobilized to respond, it encountered not resistance, but annihilation. The human ships didn't engage in drawn-out battles. They flanked, disrupted, and dismantled. Every strike was targeted, not just at military infrastructure, but at the very systems that held the Varthak's empire together. Within a week, 5 core worlds were dark. Their leadership vanished. Civil unrest followed, spurred by falsified reports planted by human intelligence that sowed doubt in every direction. Was the High Council alive? Had they fled, betrayed their own people? In reality, most were dead, caught in a single precision orbital strike while attending a clandestine war council. The attack was no accident. It had been anticipated, mapped, and executed by human agents who had waited years for this single moment. The Galactic Council finally convened an emergency session, demanding answers, calling for peace, begging for clarity. Only then did the humans speak. A single envoy, unarmed and alone, appeared before them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture or threaten. She merely placed the data on the table. Dates, coordinates, intercepted messages, and real-time battle feeds. The evidence was undeniable. The Varthaks had committed an unprovoked act of war. The humans had responded, not emotionally, not vengefully, but with precision, with restraint even. And when a Zentari diplomat dared to ask the human envoy if retaliation was truly necessary, she simply tilted her head and replied, "We didn't retaliate. We responded. This is what restraint looks like. You should pray we never stop holding back." That was the day the galaxy understood. The humans had never been diplomats. They had simply been giving the galaxy a chance. Humanity's introduction to the Galactic Assembly was not as dramatic as some might imagine. There were no interstellar wars, no sudden transmissions from deep space, no motherships hovering over capital cities. Instead, it began with a whisper, a faint signal detected from a derelict alien probe drifting near Neptune's orbit. Humanity, ever curious and ambitious, cracked its language patterns in under 6 months and followed the trail back to a dormant relay station buried within the asteroid belt. That station served as a galactic breadcrumb, one that countless other species had once followed to join the wider community. What set humans apart was how quickly they adapted. Within a decade of discovering the relay, Earth had reverse-engineered a hybrid FTL drive, established its first diplomatic mission, and sent a delegation to the Galactic Assembly. They came not as conquerors, but as learners, curious, respectful, and full of questions. The Assembly, amused and somewhat impressed, allowed them into the fold with patronizing smiles. To the older, more established civilizations, humans were seen as enthusiastic children playing at being grown-ups. Many alien species mistook humanity's diplomacy for weakness. They interpreted their eagerness to participate, their willingness to compromise, and their rapid adoption of galactic customs as signs of cultural malleability, an open door to manipulation. Humanity's lack of a unified planetary government further reinforced this view. Factions like the Terran Union, the Pacific Bloc, and the free colonies often disagreed, argued, and voted separately. What the other species failed to understand was that this apparent disunity was not a flaw, but a strength. Each human faction represented a different face of the same predator, a diverse, decentralized intelligence that could adapt to any challenge by approaching it from multiple angles. The aliens saw chaos. Humans saw strategy. They didn't notice how human delegates recorded every detail, cataloged every interaction, and quietly shared their findings across hundreds of think tanks back on Earth. While alien ambassadors grew complacent with centuries-old customs, humans were studying body language, negotiation rhythms, legal loopholes, and cultural myths, turning every interaction into a tactical blueprint. The real misjudgment came from underestimating the human timeline. Most advanced species took centuries to transition from first contact to full assembly participation. Humanity did it in less than 30 years. The rapid pace was alarming to a few, but most laughed it off. Let the humans run, they thought. Let them burn themselves out with ambition. What none of them realized was that Earth's history had been one long crucible of acceleration. From the Industrial Revolution to spaceflight in less than 3 centuries, from Cold Wars to global cooperation in just a few decades, humans evolved under pressure. They didn't just survive chaos, they thrived in it. The Assembly watched as humans rose through diplomatic ranks, led coalition relief efforts, solved disputes others had deemed unsolvable, and formed trade pacts that increased prosperity across 3 sectors. To the galaxy, it appeared humanity had found its place, as mediators, bridge builders, eager students of galactic unity. But beneath the smiles, humans were taking notes. They were cataloging weaknesses. They were mapping the power structures behind each assembly vote, identifying the hidden debts, the cultural fault lines, the unspoken rivalries. They understood early that peace was not the absence of conflict. It was the management of threat perception. While the rest of the galaxy mistook their politeness for passivity, humanity was building models, simulations, fallback scenarios. They weren't playing the game. They were learning how to control the board. Every handshake was measured. Every alliance was conditional. They joined committees not for prestige, but to observe which species voted together and which ones hesitated. It wasn't conquest they sought. It was understanding. Because understanding, for humanity, was the first step to dominance. By the time the Assembly realized their mistake, it was too late. The humans had already embedded themselves in every major economic bloc, chaired 3 of the 7 interstellar law commissions, and had representatives in the inner advisory circles of 6 regional alliances. Their influence was subtle but absolute. And still, they smiled. Still, they played their part as the eager, adaptable diplomats. Because that was the great deception. Humans didn't pretend to be powerful. They pretended to be harmless. Long before they ventured into the stars, humanity had already mastered the art of duality, projecting peace while preparing for war, offering a handshake while holding a blade behind the back. This trait, though often romanticized in human literature as cunning or strategy, was far more disturbing when examined through an interstellar lens. Alien scholars, fascinated and unsettled by the speed of humanity's integration into the Galactic Assembly, began compiling psychological and historical profiles to understand what drove this species. What they discovered was a pattern of ruthless pragmatism masked by eloquence and empathy. Human history was not simply a chronicle of conflict. It was a portfolio of how to win without appearing to fight. The Treaty of Versailles, the Cold War's nuclear stalemate, the economic colonization of resource-rich nations under the banner of aid, each a lesson in power projection through indirect means. While other species saw war as a last resort, or a cultural ritual, humans had turned it into a science. And when they chose not to use it, it wasn't mercy, it was calculation. To many alien civilizations, diplomacy meant balance, cooperation, and emotional harmony. But to humanity, diplomacy was often just war by other means. Alien analysts studying Earth's major historical turning points were struck by how often humans negotiated only after securing overwhelming leverage. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, they stood on the brink of annihilation not because they miscalculated, but because they were willing to go further than their opponent believed rational. In Rwanda and Bosnia, the world watched in horror as diplomacy failed. Yet the same world later used those tragedies as geopolitical leverage for years. These weren't flukes. They were strategic adaptations. Humans didn't shy away from horror. They studied it, compartmentalized it, and eventually weaponized the lessons. Their ability to appear idealistic while operating with cold, mechanical efficiency beneath the surface was not a glitch in their nature. It was the foundation of it. The alien biologists and psychologists assigned to observe humanity expected aggression to be rooted in biological deficiencies, perhaps a hormonal imbalance, or a survival-based fear reflex gone awry. But what they found was more alarming. Human aggression was often controlled, deliberate, and context-sensitive. It wasn't feral rage that drove them, but rather a complex neurological architecture that allowed them to rationalize brutality for the sake of long-term outcomes. Their brains were uniquely equipped for empathy. Yet that same empathy could be inverted, used to understand a target's fears and manipulate them with uncanny precision. No other species in the assembly had evolved with such an acute sense of what others felt, paired with such a willingness to exploit it when necessary. Even human children displayed this dual nature from an early age, capable of kindness, but also deception, manipulation, and strategic thinking far beyond what most sentient species developed before adulthood. One of the most unsettling revelations came from a comparative study conducted by the Zaldari Institute of Xenopsychology. They found that while most species exhibited heightened neural responses to group suffering, triggering collective grief or withdrawal, humans were unique in that they could override these instincts if a cause was perceived as just, necessary, or beneficial in the long term. In simple terms, humans could commit horrors and sleep at night, provided they believed it served a greater good. This cognitive dissonance was not considered a disorder. It was normalized, institutionalized, and in many cases, celebrated as duty or patriotism. The aliens had no word for such behavior. To them, it was as if humans had evolved not just to survive conflict, but to thrive in its presence, drawing strength from chaos and clarity from uncertainty. Even more alarming to the scholars was how effectively humans concealed this nature behind culture. Their music, art, literature, all deeply emotional and often centered around love, loss, and hope. It created a mask so convincing that many in the assembly began to believe it. They saw the poetry, the compassion, the charity, and assumed these defined the species. But humans weren't pretending to be good. They were good, in many ways. They were just also capable of immense darkness, and had learned to live with both. The galaxy had encountered conquerors, zealots, and madmen before, but never a species that could cry for a child one day, and deploy a kinetic orbital strike the next, without a flicker of hesitation. And so the assembly continued to embrace humanity, unaware that their new allies had long since mastered the art of being underestimated. Because where other species evolved claws, venom, or psychic force fields, humanity evolved something far more terrifying: the ability to smile while sharpening the knife. The attack on Kalos 3, a modest but thriving human colony on the outer edge of the Aloran spiral, came without warning, without declaration, and without mercy. Positioned on a mineral-rich planet with an atmosphere ideal for long-term terraforming, Kalos 3 was a model of cooperative expansion, partially funded by the Terran Union, operated with assistance from the Martian Directorate, and protected under the Interstellar Mutual Development Treaty. It housed nearly 50,000 civilians, many of them scientists, engineers, and families who had relocated to build the future of human exploration. In the galactic sense, it was a peaceful settlement, unarmed, unassuming. And yet, the Varthax chose it as the first strike point in a campaign they believed would reshape the balance of power. The assault began with orbital kinetic bombardments, obliterating communication towers and supply depots within seconds. Automated defense satellites, coded not for war but for meteor interception, were vaporized before they could respond. Ground-based installations followed, targeted by high-altitude plasma barrages that scorched entire regions. What few escaped ships existed were destroyed on the launch pad. It wasn't just an attack, it was an execution. Behind this act of savagery lay a web of political intrigue and calculated arrogance. The Varthax Dominion had long viewed humanity's rapid rise in the assembly with suspicion and resentment. To them, humans were an anomaly, too adaptable, too persuasive, too unpredictable. Their ability to gain influence without direct conquest disrupted the old balance of power, where dominance had always followed firepower. What made the Varthax particularly uneasy was that humans didn't seek expansion through traditional military means. They embedded themselves through alliances, trade networks, legal reform, and public sentiment. They were changing the rules of galactic influence, and the Varthax, an empire built on military tradition and rigid caste systems, found that deeply threatening. Their spies had long been embedded in assembly bureaucracy, and whispers of a rising, human bloc within the council were enough to ignite fear among the old guard. To preserve their legacy, they decided the humans needed to be taught a lesson. The political factions within the Varthax were not unified in the decision, but the ruling war caste, led by arch-strategist Kavor Threx, pushed the agenda forward with chilling clarity. His argument was simple: strike fast, strike decisively, and fracture humanity's illusion of strength. Kalos 3, far from Earth and lightly defended, was chosen precisely because it represented the human ideal: progress, peace, and cooperation. Destroying it, Threx argued, would send a message not just to humanity, but to every species that had begun to align with them. And so the War Council approved a covert operation under the guise of a rogue splinter faction, giving the Dominion plausible deniability. The plan was to crush the colony, disavow the attackers, and then offer a conciliatory gesture in the assembly to defuse retaliation. It had worked on lesser species before. What they did not anticipate was that humans had already infiltrated their political channels. They were apex tacticians, wrapped in the skin of peacemakers. Whispers began in the side halls. Had we ever known the real humans? Or only the version they wanted us to see? The older powers, the ancient empires who had once scoffed at Earth's rapid ascension, responded with something far more rare: respect. The Drell Confederacy, known for millennia of unbroken neutrality, formally requested a mutual defense pact. The Arthavari, who had abstained from military alliances for over 400 cycles, opened trade and cultural exchange channels with human colonies. These were not political gestures, they were survival strategies, because they now understood that Earth had the capacity to break or build empires, and the wisdom to choose when to do either. Even the Assembly's High Chair, a Zentari elder known for his disdain toward Terran bluntness, addressed Malik not with correction but with deference. "Ambassador," he said slowly, "Earth has shown us what it truly is. What then does Earth want?" And Malik smiled, not with arrogance, but with finality. "We want peace," she said, "but not the kind that rests on fear or silence. We want a galaxy where diplomacy has teeth, where treaties are honored, and where no species dares to believe it can commit atrocity without consequence. We will not rule, we will not conquer, but we will watch, and we will remember." The chamber didn't applaud. It couldn't, not because the speech wasn't powerful, but because every species present knew something fundamental had shifted. The humans had not risen through war. They had risen through understanding, through patience, and finally, through absolute clarity. The galaxy now saw them as they were, predators in diplomats' clothing, not because they sought blood, but because they had learned how to win without spilling it. Earth had revealed its true face, and the stars would never forget it. The Varthak's homeworld still turned beneath its sun, but its once proud fleets were scrap, its warcasts broken, its leaders either dead, exiled, or silently replaced. Kalos III, now an irradiated scar on the edge of the galaxy, remained untouched after the retaliation, not rebuilt, not colonized again. The Terran Union declared its sacred ground, a silent memorial to the price of presuming human weakness. No speeches were made there, no monuments raised. The cratered soil spoke louder than any plaque could. Across the stars, that silence echoed. The galaxy, once content with its layers of tradition, bureaucracy, and unspoken power balances, was forced to adapt. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Assembly rewrote its own foundational charter, not with new laws, but new expectations. Diplomatic immunity no longer guaranteed impunity. Trade alliances came with accountability clauses. Member species were required to report not just military buildups, but interplanetary surveillance activity. The age of hidden daggers behind smiles was not over, but now, everyone knew where to look. Central to this transformation was the emergence of a new Terran doctrine, one that spread not through warships, but through policy councils, academic lectures, and diplomatic symposiums. It came to be known as peace through clarity, and it codified what Earth had demonstrated in silence. The doctrine was simple in principle but profound in consequence. Peace is not maintained by idealism or tradition, but by understanding, clear, mutual, unshakable. Clarity meant no secrets between allies, no tolerance for gray areas in treaties, no diplomatic facades shielding malicious intent. Earth presented this doctrine not as a demand, but as a model. Their own interstellar behaviors shifted accordingly. More open data sharing with allies, more transparent security frameworks, and most shockingly, voluntary audits of Terran military capabilities by neutral third parties. It wasn't a show of weakness. It was a challenge to the galaxy. "We are willing to be known. Are you?" Many species welcomed the doctrine. For the vulnerable civilizations, clarity meant protection. For the weary empires, it offered a chance to end centuries of silent hostility without losing face. Even traditional rivals found value in the Terran model. Not because they trusted Earth, but because Earth had proven that hidden strength is more terrifying than declared power. The humans didn't need to threaten anyone. They simply made it clear that every decision had consequences, and every treaty would be upheld in spirit, not just in letter. Earth did not ask the galaxy to fear them. They simply made it impossible to ignore them. The Varthaks, stripped of military influence, and now under provisional observation by the Assembly, became the most unlikely advocates of the new order. Their younger generations, raised in the shadow of the fall, began adopting Terran educational structures, diplomatic frameworks, and even elements of human philosophy. "Strength without wisdom is suicide," one of their new scholars famously wrote. Earth taught us this, not with sermons, but with silence, strategy, and justice. And so the galaxy shifted, not under the weight of war, but under the gravity of example. Kalos III was still ashes. Varthak's ambition was still buried. But from that ruin rose a new galactic equilibrium. Tense, watchful, but strangely balanced. Not because humans conquered it, but because they clarified it. Peace was no longer assumed. It was understood. And that understanding, more than any weapon, was what made Earth truly dangerous. Long after the fires of Kalos III faded into memory, long after the Varthaks were reduced to a humbled people navigating reconstruction under the eyes of an alert galaxy, the image of humanity remained forever altered. In diplomatic halls and backroom negotiations, in strategy briefings and cultural think tanks, one phrase continued to echo like a quiet warning. The human smile with teeth. It was not an insult. It was not even fear, exactly. It was recognition. of a truth most species had long ignored or failed to perceive: that humanity, for all its openness and idealism, for all its art and diplomacy and talk of unity, was never truly soft. They had always been something older, something primal. They wore civilization like armor, not because they were pretending to be better than they were, but because they understood exactly what they could become if they chose otherwise. Their diplomats still came with open hands, offering treaties and shared technology and invitations to peaceful cooperation. Their fleets still moved in formation drills, not offensives. Their AI advisory networks helped developing worlds avoid famine, drought, and war. But behind it all, in the background of every interaction, there was a new awareness across the stars. If humanity ever decided that talking had failed, the alternative would not be chaos. It would be precision, not vengeance, not bloodlust, but calculated, total clarity, administered with surgical detachment. The galaxy had seen it once, no one wanted to see it again, and the humans were watching, quietly, patiently, without assumption. Their intelligence networks had only grown more sophisticated since the Varthax incident. Quiet observatories drifted in deep space, unnoticed by most, listening to transmissions in dead languages and tracking energy fluctuations where fleets should not be. Covert AI agents embedded themselves in open-source knowledge hubs across the assembly, mapping trends and predicting tensions before they could flare into crisis. Humanity didn't seek dominance, they sought awareness, because the doctrine of peace through clarity was not just about deterrence, it was about preparation, because they knew, better than anyone, that peace was fragile, and predators don't sleep, they just watch. In the far reaches of uncharted space, where strange signals sometimes whispered through the void and long-forgotten probes returned with corrupted memories, there were murmurs of something else, something older than the assembly, colder than war, patient in a way only the void could teach. Others might have dismissed it as cosmic noise, but humanity listened and archived and prepared, because if another darkness was coming, it would find Earth ready, not eager, not afraid, just ready. So the humans smiled, warm, sincere, generous. But behind that smile, in the glint of their eyes, the galaxy remembered what the Varthax had learned too late, that even in peace, some predators never stop sharpening their teeth. And so, the galaxy moved forward, changed, cautious, and undeniably wiser. The stars still burned, trade still flowed, and diplomacy still danced its intricate ballet. But beneath it all lingered the quiet imprint of a species that had rewritten the balance not with conquest, but with consequence. Humanity had not asked for fear, yet they earned respect. They had not demanded loyalty, yet they inspired alignment. Because in a universe long ruled by power and pretense, Earth had introduced something new: clarity, enforced not by empire, but by unshakable will. To the distant world still watching from the shadows, to the ancient forces stirring beyond the rim, and to the species yet to rise into the assembly's light, understand this: the humans are not your saviors, nor your destroyers. They are the silent measure of what comes next. They hope for peace, they prepare for war, and they remember everything. Because now the galaxy knows the truth. Humanity walks with open hands, but never without the shadow of a clenched fist behind them, a smile with teeth. If you enjoyed this journey into the hidden depths of humanity's galactic rise, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more stories that challenge the stars themselves. Like, comment, and share your thoughts. What part of humanity's true nature surprised you the most? Your voice matters, and together we'll explore even greater tales of strength, strategy, and survival. Join the fold, because the story is far from over.